Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let us begin session 3 on the role of universities in Green ODA. First, please welcome Ms. Gerzina Pawlowska, Acting Director of Sustainability Development and Public Health Department at Asia Europe Foundation.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to share the screen. I would like to thank everybody for the possibility to speak and share a little bit about what we have been doing in Asia Europe Foundation. We are not university per se. We are the international organization that has been funded in 1997. However, our mandate is very special because we are meant to connect what are the opinions of civil society, formulate it, and then further on deliver it to the ASEM governments. So this is our mandate. We do work with 51 countries, where we also include European Union and ASEAN Secretariat in our constituency. In general, our main objective is to promote understanding between Asians and Europeans, enable exchanges, and organize different projects. So what I would like to share with you is the focus that we are having on education and capacity building projects. And I believe this is why we have this opportunity to share with you what we have been working so far. We do this regarding environment under the umbrella of Asia Europe Environment Forum. And Asia Europe Environment Forum is a consortium of a couple of organizations, including Asia Europe Foundation, Hans Seidel Foundation, ASEM SMEs Eco-Innovation Center. This is the organization that is based in Korea for this, maybe this is interesting for this specific audience, Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, and Stockholm Environment Institute for the special arrangement with Swedish government. What we are aiming at is research, knowledge exchange, and capacity building. And the issues, or rather the approach that we have behind those three pillars are mostly focusing on peer-to-peer exchange, which means we do try to provide platform for dialogue without bias that allows people to share their knowledge and expertise. In general, what we have been working quite strongly since Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda implementation is focusing on governance, climate change, financing, as well as implementation of Sustainable Development Goals. Moreover, there is also the issues of that we have been working on that is related to circular economy and the SDG 12, where we were looking into sustainable consumption and production, and further on specifically into garments and plastics industry. We are involved in knowledge exchange activities where we organize conferences. We do contribute to other conferences. Next week, there will be United Nations Sustainable Development Office in Korea as well, Transition Forum, that will be looking also in SDGs implementation that we are knowledge partner. And then we are very strongly cooperating with Professor Suyong during climate change conference. We do focus on capacity building, specifically looking at ASEAN region. And in general, we in principle are trying to bridge different points of view, but also different topics, which is we are looking at circular economy and climate change, looking into plastics and climate change. And given the ongoing pandemic situation, we are going online, and then we will be working on online workshops. And coming to the main focus of today's conference, I would like to speak a little bit about green financing in Asia and Europe, and then spend some time to share with you what we have been working so far and what are our ideas for the next projects. So ASEF has been working on issue of financing sustainable development goals, where we were looking, among other things, very closely at the ODA commitments of different countries. And when we were looking at that, despite overall opinion about the lack of funding for the green initiatives, we have discovered that there's actually a lot of untapped resources, and one of them is ODA, and it still seems to be that it is one of the crucial source of development financing. However, there would be a huge difference if the ODA donors actually would fulfill their commitments. I know that there has been, in general, very positive outlook when we were looking at green ODA and we were talking about the commitment of different governments. However, not all the countries are actually working on deliver what they promised. So this is something that I believe might be overlooked with the ongoing situation related to pandemic, as well as the challenges that governments are facing. So like the main issue is related with the fact that in order to make the green financing work, and in general ODA financing work, it would make a tremendous difference if the countries would actually fulfill their commitments. Moreover, there is a very big gap between available investment and total investment needs. And then in general, this can be remedied. We have looked at a couple of initiatives. So in general, if ODA is used as the catalyst, and then it can be paired with private funding, and namely involvement of businesses or different types of public-private partnerships, this can really help to move the 2030 agenda forward. Moreover, there is now we have seen the trend towards making ODA funding used to fight pandemic and invest in recovery, which creates an opportunity to green the economy. And in general, this has been something that ASEF has been working very strongly on, which is focusing on circular economy and greening supply chains. And what I would like to bring to this discussion is related with the fact that when we are discussing about how, sometimes we forget what is the focus. And one point that we are looking into is related with innovation and product design that is partly connected with extended producers' responsibility. So basically, when we are looking at the innovation and product design, very often there is no regulation of any kind in the countries, which includes creating products, productions, manufacturing, and the whole supply chain. There is not really a consistent or any type of policy that is binding producers or innovators to think through the whole product design, which means very often, and the example can be related with the electric cars, when you have wonderful idea to green transportation, and then you create batteries, and then you create green cars that are really popular nowadays, and everybody seems to believe that it will really transform the economy. And then in the end of the day, nobody really thought through what to do with the batteries after their product life is over. Because in the design and in the whole approach toward making new products, there was no obligation, and there was no, I might even say there was no consistent approach towards the fact, okay, what do we do with these batteries afterwards? Like, can we recycle them? And then the similar thing is related with plastic. I mean, ASEF is now about to publish the research when we were looking in 51 countries at the different types of plastic initiatives, what countries are doing, what is happening on the national level, how much it is connected to the policy. And sadly enough, most of the business-related plastic initiatives are not connected with the issues related to thinking what to do with the plastic afterwards. There is a lot of initiatives that are looking into recycling, and then there is overall challenge related with waste management. However, it's really tricky to look at the things that are looking beyond that, which is related with product design. Like this reflection, like, do we actually need to have plastic at all in these products or in the supply chain? Then we have also looked into extended producer responsibility. Many countries are now looking into introducing laws, but this is still quite diverse. And I think at the moment it's too early for me to really elaborate on that, what would be the extent of the changes. But I think in general, bringing this to this whole discussion about green ODA and how countries are shaping their foreign investment, that would be also very useful. And another thing that it is so-called low-hanging fruit is green procurement. So when we look at 51 ASEM countries, we have noticed that most of the countries have some kind of green procurement arrangements. However, there is no common definition. And then I think this is also something that has been mentioned before, that international cooperation on making some kind of standard that would look into what does green procurement mean and introducing it internationally could really make a significant change in how the recovery is going on and in general in greening the economy. And we will work on those topics more, and then we will have the next Asia-Europe Environment Forum conference in November this year. So I would like to encourage you to also share with me if you have been working on those topics and this is something that you would like to share. Our mission in general is to collect this type of information and then serve as a forum that can connect different points of view. And that would be all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Plavska, for your presentation. Next, let me introduce Dr. Ruben Voski, Chief Natural Resource Economist at Environmental Defense Fund.
Thank you, everyone. I will share my screen. That's working. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Professor Chung, and to all the organizers for the invitation. I want to talk about an initiative that we are helping to launch called the Green Gigaton Challenge, which is a public-private partnership to try to catalyze financing for 1 billion tons a year of high-quality emission reductions from protecting tropical forests. And I think this is an example of an initiative that I think helps to bring together some of the themes we heard today around the importance of forests, the importance of the Paris Agreement, but I think also critically the importance of using ODA in a way that can really catalyze other sources of finance, particularly private finance. So we heard that from Barbara Buchner, we heard that from Gina Pulaski right now. So I want to talk about how ODA, using this example, can really help scale up impact in various ways. One is by catalyzing private finance, also by using results-based payments. So I will talk about that. That's something we've touched on, but I want to go into more detail, and also how these results-based payments can apply at large scales. So the level of entire countries or large subnational jurisdictions like states within a country. And I think through all these ways, through results-based payments, through large-scale programs, and by leveraging both public and private finance, we can have much bigger scale of impact that we need to protect forests and make a meaningful improvement for the climate. So the Green Gigaton Challenge is an initiative that's actually being launched actually tomorrow in the US time at the UN Environment Assembly. it's a partnership of the United Nations REDD program, which is the UNDP, UN Environment Program, and also the Food and Agriculture Organization. So it's the United Nations. I'm involved through the Environmental Defense Fund. We're a nonprofit that's working on market-based solutions to environmental problems and other partners. And as I said, the goal is to have a public-private coalition that can mobilize 1 gigaton or 1 billion tons of jurisdictional scale, and I'll talk more about that, which means national or large state or province level results in terms of forest conservation and restoration per year through 2025. And this is just a beginning of what we estimate is needed for cost-effective implementation of the current level of NDCs that countries have put forth under the Paris Agreement. What's the rationale for this Green Gigaton Challenge? One is that forest countries have made a lot of progress developing these different types of programs, using a lot of traditional ODA to develop capacity building, policy plans, monitoring systems, and other measures. But in order to really shift now to implementation, they need a clear signal of international funding at large scales, because these programs really require large investments to achieve the goals that can really achieve and hopefully overachieve the NDCs. So large amounts of finance is needed, but also importantly, right now we're at an inflection point. Never before have we seen this potential where public finance can really leverage private finance. Things have really shifted with developments under the Paris Agreement, other international climate frameworks, like for international aviation, regulated carbon markets, such as the Korea ETS, and ETS in other countries as well, and a real surge in voluntary climate action from corporations over the past few years. It's really been remarkable. And there's a lot of interest now in carbon credits and other investments in climate change. And importantly, on the forest side, we've had also a lot of advances. I won't go into all the history, but importantly, last year, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, approved for the first time the use of REDD plus in an international compliance carbon market, and particularly based on 2 standards based on jurisdictional large-scale accounting. So this is a real validation and recognition of the role these systems can play in carbon markets. And so there's a lot of interest from the private sector, and the Green Gigaton Challenge is trying to help organize that, but also put it together with public sector support. And importantly, using ODA in, as a way to guarantee a minimum level of demand for forest countries. But importantly, we've seen this type of results-based finance in the past, the Green Climate Fund, bilateral efforts from Germany, Norway, UK, the World Bank we've heard about earlier from Director Ahn, has in the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility has been paying. Korea has some efforts of paying forest countries for results. But importantly, what's new here is that the public funding just provides a floor price. So the idea is that it's a guarantee of a minimum level of demand for forest countries, but with the idea that public funding may not need to be used if private demand is sufficient. So, for example, public funders would commit to buying credits or high quality emission reductions at $10 a ton. But if private buyers are willing to pay $10 or more, the private buyers could come first. And then if there's additional reductions, the public funding could be used, or maybe the public funding could just be recycled to future guarantees. So there's an example that was provided in 2019. We actually heard about CAFI, the Central African Forest Initiative. It was great to hear that Korea is involved as a participant. That CAFI, Norway, and the country of Gabon reached an agreement where Norway, through CAFI, is guaranteeing a floor price of $10 a ton for high quality jurisdictional scale emission reductions using this new standard, and actually $5 a ton if it's based on a less rigorous standard. So it's an interesting model where public donors are providing just a minimum price guarantee with the idea of giving confidence to the forest countries that they can start investing and implementing these programs, but with the idea that this can actually unlock a large volume of high quality supply, which then private buyers can finance. And the ODA is just being used as a guarantee. I won't go into much detail. I think we've heard that tropical deforestation is really essential for climate change. We're very focused on this because it's one of the largest opportunities in the near term that can deliver at least 1 billion tons of reductions. And we did an analysis at EDF that out of approximately, out of the most near-term opportunities, after we're talking about the Chinese energy sector, the US and EU energy sectors, the biggest opportunities were from protecting tropical forests in Brazil and the Amazon and Indonesia, each at least 1 billion tons. So approximately a quarter or a third of the biggest potential in the near term. I mentioned this idea of jurisdictional approach. The idea is that we're moving away from isolated projects to measuring change at the level of a whole country or other large region like a state or a province. And this has a lot of advantages because it incentivizes all the actors, including importantly the government, to work towards implementing what's needed to stop deforestation, because we need action from private sector, from agriculture sector, from protected areas, parks, local communities, indigenous peoples, but also government, importantly. It takes all the actors to deliver the meaningful change. And also from an environmental integrity perspective, there's a lot of benefits from looking at it at a big scale. Great. So this is just a slide to highlight that we need public funding, but also private funding as well. And we've done an analysis that roughly right now there's about $1 billion of public funding for REDD+. We need, if we had a market that effectively implemented the current NDCs, we could mobilize up to $8 billion a year. And if we were really on track to meet a 2-degree target, we estimate that you could have a market of $40 billion per year. So there's a lot more potential from the private sector that can be leveraged. Now, a challenge we face is what we call a chicken and egg problem. So, we can't have the egg without the chicken, but we also can't have the chicken without the egg. In particular, there's a big potential supply of high quality forest protection and emission reductions that's possible, but the supply is hard to unlock without the demand. But on the other hand, the demand has been hard to unlock because there's not a lot of high quality supply, and especially private sector wants to know when are the credits going to be delivered, from where, what's the price, when are they coming, what's the standard, and all these things you can't answer until you have the supply. So that's part of what we're trying to unlock with the Green Gigaton Challenge, where we're trying to get the public donors to provide the floor price. We're already working with the government of Norway, very productive conversations with other governments. Potentially this could be something that Korea might be interested in, or at least in using this model for other applications and maybe other countries or other climate opportunities. But we think if we could get 1 billion tons of demand, that would really unlock this whole market by showing the countries that there's serious demand, and then in turn unlocking large-scale supply that private buyers can start coming to buy. Just very quickly, there's a lot of advantages of this results-based payment model. So we're talking about payment for verified emission reductions after they've been achieved. And that's what the payment is for. It's not for inputs in terms of capacity or particular strategies, but that is very helpful. It has been very helpful, but it's hard to use that to get to scale because it's a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of due diligence and administration that's required. And that hinders moving to scale. On the other hand, results-based finance, where you're paying for delivery of measurable outcomes, can facilitate much larger scale. It can also, as I said, catalyze the private sector. It can allow public donors to commit much larger scale resources, in the billions of tons, as we've seen, of dollars, as we've seen from Norway and others, and at lower risk, because the risk of actual designing the implementation is shared with the countries, and they bear the risk of the performance or share the risk, and can also choose how they want to deliver the performance. And doesn't mean that traditional development grants won't be needed, but this can, we think, play a very important role. Just one quick diagram of how this works. This is part of the broader strategy for implementing the Green Gigaton Challenge. We have an organization called Emergent that's been set up. It's a nonprofit that's one of the partners that's trying to be the intermediary. Importantly, it's a nonprofit, so it's not trying to make money here, but the idea is that if countries deliver the results, right now there's one standard, there might be other standards that provide the verification independently of the results. And Emergent now either aggregates private buyers to come in with private finance, but also has public donors who are this buyer of last resort that can provide the minimum floor price. So Emergent is the delivery mechanism of this finance. And importantly, there's also work with other financial intermediaries to track the flow of funds, because ODA funding in particular comes with various requirements. It has to be spent for climate and forest purposes, for example, et cetera. So there needs to be this tracking of the funding. So I'll just leave it at that, but I think this is an example of how ODA in the climate space and forest space can be used in a way that harnesses private sector finance and can deliver results at large scales. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Voski, for your presentation. Now, let me introduce Ms. Jin Young Kim, Director of Asia at Global Green Growth Institute, with a big welcome.
Thank you very much, Professor Zheng and Heyun. Let me share my screen. Yes, it's such a pleasure to be part of this conversation. While earlier speakers presented a landscape of green ODA and also shared important insights, what I'm gonna do through my presentation is add an element on how green ODA will actually work, in particular for Korea. So I want to bring two additional elements in this conversation. What is the focus on climate technologies? Because the while we are looking at the overall financing gaps and also the necessity for greening development assistance, one key element to enable our developing country partners to go on green growth transition and address the climate the disasters, and at this time build the resilience against climate change, and also develop their economy. The solution will lie on climate technologies, and climate technology has been always part of important conversation of global climate agenda. So I want to emphasize that. And second of all, the echoing earlier speakers focus on how this public finance can catalyze private investment. Then the focus have to be the solution, what to invest in, and then what type of technology can be applied for developing countries. And my story will be based on a recent study GGGI conducted together with one of the Korean partner, Green Technology Center, for Korean Ministry of Science and ICT. The main aim of this this study is to come up with a recommendation for ministry how to improve the climate technology ODA projects from the ministry, and in consideration of the Korea's particular focus on technology R&D and deployment, and also coming up with several suggestions for the ministry with some concepts ministry can immediately apply for in the coming period in terms of ideating the green focused ODA projects. And let me share some of the key insight from the study. So one of the key insight is the overall how methodology, how to ideate green technology ODA projects and deploy it, and ultimately make that project, the technology, sustainable in developing country context. So how to make the ODA project effective and work is actually the underlying idea about the underlying thinking about how this study, and the steps the Korean ODA would take will be also reflecting the existing methodologies and approaches international organizations and ODA agency have been undertaking, also building on Korea's own methodology. But there are a few areas to be looked at in more detail, and then to improve. So we outlined approximately 7 steps, which is quite straightforward in a way. The starting point with from Korea identifying key recipient country group or regions. Professor Jung earlier mentioned about Korea's northbound foreign policy and southbound foreign policy. The foreign policy objective can be reflected in this type of prioritization of countries and regions. And then the second starting point is the understanding the country context, starting from rapid study for the NDCs and technology needs assessment, country partner strategy, and the latest policy have to be factored into in coming up with a new green ODA project. And then amongst the broad scanning of the needs of the countries, the selection of priority areas, it could be sectors or particular technology solutions. In this context, at this stage, the ODA's donor government have to partner with the international organizations or agencies who have presence in the recipient countries to have the continuous systematic conversation and prioritization. And once the priority has been assessed, the key next step is actually validate those thinking with the recipient country's key stakeholders who will be also partnering in this project and who will be championing such project into implementation. And then the once the priority is confirmed at both sides, both the donor side and also recipient's side, the key is corroborating such a selection with a pre-feasibility study to feasibility studies, and then once the technical evidence is collected, the next step is actually developing, structuring the projects, and then while the project is being structured, key partners should be mobilized, and then also financial resources to be mobilized through the process of donor. But the key consideration throughout this 7 stages of process is the bankability. Ultimately, the ODA project have to leverage the local ownership and also the bankability of that project. It could be solar, it could be smart farming, it could be the sustainable transport. But once such a green ODA project reflecting the country's national priority and climate objectives, the ideated, the ultimate purpose is the project is being continued to solve the green growth problem of the country. So this the framework is outlined, and then the particular emphasis from this exercise is actually the doing good needs assessment. There has been element of needs assessment in existing ODA project ideation framework, but sometimes such assessment is not directly linked to the local level, the developing countries. Developed countries are in very dynamic situation in terms of the developing their own priorities. So such process has to be the very interactive and iterative in order to ensure that the project ideated have longer term, the relevance for the country, not the timing, when the project is started, reflecting, the backwards, the earlier, the work done. So the more future forward and sustainable project ideation has to be based on highly systematic and iterative, conversation between donor and recipient. And in order to have effective conversation, there could be a range of partnership. It could be local NGOs, it could be local the agencies of donor government, or international organizations who have presences in developing countries. And then through these exercises for these group of South Asia countries, a number of the priority have been, sectoral priority have been identified. The diagram you are seeing right now is the matching between developing countries' climate priorities and also Korea's strength in terms of climate technologies. And by matching developed country needs and the Korea's comparative strength in climate technology or sectoral experiences, though there is several priority can be identified through this exercise. And then the area is broadly the natural capital related area, agriculture, agroforestry, and smart farming, and waste management for rapidly growing the developing countries, in particularly in Asia, or also waste to energy. And green cities are another the core element of developing countries for NDCs and also the longer term development objectives. And after the ideating on ODA project or several the projects as a country level program or regional program, the key element continuously to be further looked into, developed, is actually sustainability of such project, meaning that there should be the institutional level ownership and champion from developing country. At the same time, the very detailed steps to bring this ODA level project into bankable stages. What you are seeing in the left side, the pilot stages, mostly ODA project has been so far covered through COICA or NORAD and OCAID and USAID and many other ODA funding tend to focus on the initiating the green or climate focused project, but it in many cases stops at pilot stages instead of getting into the larger scale, more impactful, the implementation project involving local banks and local, the businesses. So in between pilot stage and scaling up stages, there are further, the opportunities for various development partners can jump at and then do more for the win-win ODA program for both donor side and recipient side. So key consideration is from ideation stage, make green ODA projects in consideration of this can be a bridge connector between a pilot to the bankable projects. And then through that process, key consideration is minimizing information asymmetries between the donor side investors and the recipient side private sectors and stakeholders, so that there is common playing ground for both donor side players and recipient side. And then the continuous, the focus on improving environment research, not just the energy project or the agricultural project, but the project itself has to ensure long-term environmental results. And also this means that the streamlining and clarifying regulatory process from pilot stage to actual deployment stages. And then another key element is lowering the risk and transaction cost for investors. In many cases, when ODA project from a particular donor is the initiated recipient country, it also means that the partnership behind donor country private sector and the recipient country private sector, then the risk element, the risk mitigation efforts should be geared towards addressing the perceived risk for donors, private sector, including the banking sector and local investment. So that's one of the novel finding that we want to suggest. And then in terms of the priority projects, in particular for Asia countries, we looked at for the next 5 to 10 years, the key electric mobility, including the charging infrastructure, was one of the common, the priority between the Korea and also the Asia developing countries. Another element is waste management. Korea has quite a vast, the experience and accumulated the know-hows about the city level and national level waste management that can be continued, and climate smart agriculture as a means to drive the green recovery of mostly the agrarian and rural developing countries, and at the same time longer term transition for green growth. And digitization is a particular element, in particular for emerging developing economy like Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and Indonesia, where Korea has global strength in terms of technology level. And another element we can consider is the technology entrepreneurship. This has both the element of technology transfer and also capacity building, particularly for private sector. There has been many efforts for institutional regulatory capacity building for the developing countries, but in order for climate technology or ODA or green ODA to be really effective, we have to empower local level, the private sector. In majority of cases, the micro to small and medium companies. One innovative way to make that happen is building partnership between Korea's Korean business and then developing country MSME, and while setting up technology projects, either the coming up with a structure of joint ventures, and also the supported by the incubation and acceleration of local entrepreneurs. That could be one innovative way Korea can also take on. And in fact, the GGGI is collaborating with the Korean Development Bank and to also Green Climate Fund on this element, focusing on Philippines, Indonesia, Laos, PDR, and Cambodia to bring green technology entrepreneurship program. The total size we are discussing is 120 million size to provide the acceleration and incubation support for these 4 country MSME, and also build the partnership between Korea and other developed country business and these developed country MSMEs. And then finally, then what need to be further done, in particular for Korea's ODA, green ODA, how to improve. So the key is understanding country needs for Korea's support, and then there should be more systematic, the efforts to be done through the partnership with other development partners, in particular those who have the permanent presence in developing countries. And I cannot further more emphasize this element. This means actually how Korea can be successful engaging developed countries through the mutually rewarding way, not just one way ODA. And then the second element is the consideration have to be put on the appropriate level of localized green technology. What has been worked already in the European countries or Korea or advanced country cannot be directly transplanted in developing country context. Then reflecting national circumstances, how to adapt those technologies, make those technologies workable is key element of green ODA. And also the R&D element. Innovation should be the main driver for this partnership, and this ODA, international green ODA, should have an element of the research and development, in particular within the developing country. That is another recommendation we want to make. And then finally, the more and better coordination is required. The bringing the multi-layered stakeholders, the ODA governing ministry, and also there are several partners and think tank who are in particular Korea Ministry of Science and Information Technology working on, and also the private sector together, and also from recipient developing countries side, the champion ministry, local investors and banks, and also local technology developers, and also the MSME. All these, the multi-layered stakeholders have to brought together in this, the ODA ideation to deployment value chain. Let me stop here, and thank you very much for having me for this important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kim, for your presentation. Next, please welcome Dr. Sarwat Chaudhuri, Policy Specialist at UNDP Seoul Policy Center, with a big round of applause.
Thank you. Yes, so my name is Sarwat Chaudhuri. I manage UNDP's environment program here in South Korea. And thank you to to Professor Chong, Hyung, and everyone else for inviting us to this important and very timely conference. So as you can see, I'll be speaking about the role of international organizations in green ODA. And in my presentation, I'll focus mainly on the UNDP's work in this area. So let's go to the next slide. Yes, so this is just a reality check, as you have seen this slide before in our director's presentation earlier this morning. So this is a chart that shows, as of February 2021, the amount of money that G20 countries have committed towards either green or brown recovery since the COVID-19 pandemic started last year. So the brown recovery, as you can see, outweighs the green recovery in both total amount as well as per capita. So currently, environmentally perverse subsidies seem to be the predominant trend. And this is quite unfortunate because COVID-19 pandemic provides us a rare opportunity to build back better, as we have heard before during the session today. So robust green recovery plans must be meaningfully integrated into multi-year, multi-dimensional economic growth plans. Next, move to the next slide. So the enormous health, economic, and social crisis resulting from the pandemic is an opportunity to utilize the funds for smart recovery by undertaking wider-ranging and fundamental restructuring of critical sectors and activities. So it makes economic sense to plan the recovery packages to be green and the transition to low emission, carbon resilient and resource efficient economies in socially inclusive ways. So in the recovery phase, governments and parliaments are so far looking into re-stimulating their economies as an overriding priority, monitoring the impact of recovery and stimulus measures on environmental outcomes through measurable, comparable, and timely indicators can be key to ensure effective green recovery measures. In terms of policies for green recovery, I wanted to highlight a few. This includes combining green biodiversity-friendly low-emission approaches into initial macro and micro-level rescue policies, medium-term economic stimulus packages, and longer-term green economy transition planning. So investing in fiscal, monetary, legislative, and market incentives for green economy and modeling and assessment tools to align policies with other biodiversity, environment, and climate goals is another important policy. Accelerating the energy transition and tackling fossil fuel subsidies is also very important. Low oil prices offer a unique opportunity to remove economically and environmentally damaging fossil fuel subsidies, invest in clean, efficient, and renewable energy infrastructure systems, and promote resilient urban planning, investing in sustainable consumption, and also green hydrogen measures. Also, policies can include green energy projects that can promote rural community energy, for example, in health facilities. Also, reducing socioeconomic vulnerabilities with green jobs that tackle poverty and inequality and support vulnerable communities through green recovery projects. For example, reforestation can stimulate rural economies by creating jobs. I wanted to make two other points in this slide. Environmental multilateralism can facilitate inclusive green recovery. A recent OECD report shows that fragmented approaches limit the effectiveness of climate action, and providers can scale up effective climate action through common standards in data, finance, and infrastructure. As it's been noted also before in today's conference, green ODA is a significant enabler for global green recovery by mainstreaming green policies into development. Let's go to the next slide. So, role of international organizations in green ODA. International organizations can have a significant role to play within the context of Green ODA and global green recovery for sustainable development, as they have a comparative advantage with existing networks, ongoing projects, knowledge of local context, allowing them to be valuable partners for implementation and facilitation activities, along with finding synergies and developing integrated policies. In terms of facilitator role, I wanted to highlight one example from Ghana and Switzerland. They signed a bilateral agreement on a number of projects which will enable clean cooking and solar lighting and benefit up to 5 million Ghanaian households. And this new partnership also enables adoption of green and low carbon technologies across the country, catalyzing private sector investment into Ghana's National Energy Access Program and its own NDC. UNDP facilitated this dialogue between Switzerland and Ghana, building trust in the process in both sides, and also offering our technical support in implementation. And in the slide, you can see two pictures of our Build Back Better series. Our director referred to this in his presentation. So from UNDP Seoul Policy Center, we are working with, as facilitator with partners in Korea, experts in Korea, and global experts. We had under the Build Back Better series, we had a webinar on Korea's medical waste management practices, comparing with global practices. So we brought in experts from WHO and other developing countries on Green New Deal and Green Recovery. We had 2 webinars so far last year, again bringing in experts from the EU and different development partners and developing countries, including Rwanda and Bangladesh. And so these are kind of the facilitation roles we are playing and kind of looking into this ongoing dialogue and on policies that work for green recovery and what is in a contextualized basis for each country. In terms of implementation support, UNDP is an accredited multilateral implementing agency of GCF, GEF, Multilateral Fund, and Adaptation Funds. So for example, as a GEF implementing agency, UNDP offers integrated technical services for eligibility assessment, program formulation, co-financing, implementation oversight, knowledge and resource management, evaluation, and performance-based payments. In terms of synergies, finding synergies and developing integrated policies, I wanted to give an example from Integrated Solutions on the green sukuk work in Indonesia. So UNDP has provided ongoing support to the Ministry of Finance and relevant line ministries in developing and issuing green sukuk and connecting investors, entrepreneurs, government, Islamic finance institutions, philanthropists, and youth. Which helped the country become the first to issue a US dollar denominated sovereign green Islamic bond, which is the sukuk that leverages private finance for climate change mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity preservation. So following issuances in 2018 and 19 with total proceeds amounting to $2 billion US, the government is planning to continue with this green sukuk issuance over the coming years. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So in terms of knowledge exchange, here you can see some pictures from forest. Professor Son in his presentation talked about Korea's forestry experiences and how it reforested itself from the devastation of the Korean War. So from our policy center in Seoul, we are working with Korean partners like Korea University, Korea Forest Service, and NIFOS, and sharing and exchanging Korea's forestry experience with the developing countries, and we call them SDG partnerships. And currently we're working in Ghana, Tajikistan, Mongolia, and Myanmar. So the picture on top you see is a Ghanaian delegation that came to Korea just before the pandemic, so towards the end of 2019, and we went around the country for forestry research and Korea's forestry experience. And the bottom picture you see is a mission from Korea with from our center, and also Korean experts from NIFOS went to Myanmar and the Mon state. We are working with with the local counterparts on community forestry projects. And also another one I wanted to highlight is UNDP helped Romania develop an aid architecture with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Romanian Aid Agency and line ministries and other public institutions, development NGOs and academia media institutions. So let us move to the next slide. So role of international organization also in terms of triangular and multilateral cooperation. So a recent OECD report demonstrated that the top international organizations participating in green triangular cooperation projects. So that's a table you can see. I won't read out all the names, but you can see UNDP is one of those top organizations. And an example in this kind of cooperation is with Denmark's support in Africa. And so as part of Denmark's focus on enabling coherent South-South cooperation between China and African countries, and also the UN's Sustainable Energy for All initiative, UNDP China, our country office in China, is working with developing the renewable energy technology transfer project, which ensures a holistic transfer of renewable energy technologies from China to Ghana and also in Zambia. And from the UNDP Seoul Policy Center, we have been working on development cooperation issues for a long time. And recently, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Korea, we jointly co-hosted an expert meeting on ROK's development cooperation. And this event was actually organized to commemorate Korea's 10-year anniversary to the OECD DAC membership. And in that event, we also had a session focusing on Korea's contribution towards environmental multilateralism and role of South-Southern triangular cooperation. This the picture you can see in the bottom it was one of our last hybrid events. So we were able to organize web-based event, but also in person before the COVID cases went up late last year. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. So the UNDP's comparative advantage. So I won't read out all the numbers you can see here on the screen. So basically, climate change, as we know, is intrinsically linked to all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030. So this includes eradicating poverty, zero hunger, reducing inequalities. So UNDP works with countries to turn their climate goals into action. And at the heart of this is our support for designing and delivering ambitious climate plans or NDCs. And also we work on adaptation issues, mitigation issues in 140 countries, helping to integrate climate risk into national and subnational development planning and provide long-term support to countries to take action on the ground for resilient, carbon neutral and sustainable economies. So let's go to the next slide. So in this slide, we are talking about UNDP's support to governments in pursuing a green recovery. And this focuses on three key areas: driving a low carbon energy transition, including policy de-risking and reform of fossil fuel subsidies. For example, our work is ongoing in Malaysia, Rwanda, Uzbekistan. Also looking into lowering poverty and inequality through integrated nature climate solutions through green jobs creation, digital inclusion, clean energy access, and social protection measures and governance. And the last one on leveraging nature-based solutions to preserve and enhance natural capital to combat climate change and biodiversity loss and enhance sustainable production and consumption. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So on climate promise, this represents a commitment from the organization to ensure that any country that wishes to review and revise its climate pledges under Paris Agreement is able to do so. So formally, it was launched at the UN Climate Summit in September 2019. And this is the world's largest global offer on NDC enhancement. Currently, we are supporting 115 countries in collaboration with over 35 partners and as a contribution to the NDC partnership. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So with support from Sweden, Germany, EU, and other countries, UNDP ensures this NDC enhancement support is complementary and leverages the mandates, comparative advantages, and skill sets to various strategic partners. So we collaborate with over 35 partners to deliver support to countries. For example, IRENA on renewable energy, UN Environment on energy, nature-based solution resource efficiency, FAO on agriculture and land use, and GIZ on energy, MRV, adaptation, and other thematic areas. So current 115 climate promise countries in collaboration, as I mentioned, with 35 partners. This portfolio also includes 37 least developed countries, 28 small island developing states, 14 higher emitters, 42 fragile states. And despite the challenges of COVID-19 and also the setbacks to NDC submission timelines, more than half of the climate promise countries are linking NDC enhancement with green recovery in line with UN Secretary General's Recover Better principle. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So UNDP's offer using NDCs to inform green recovery includes support for aligning NDCs and green recovery policies. So UNDP supports countries to mainstream climate change into recovery planning processes using the NDC framework, and provides macroeconomic modeling tools, hotspot analysis to guide priority setting in national development agendas, and also conducts quantitative and qualitative assessment of NDC's impacts on green job creation, health, and gender equality. In terms of leveraging and integrating climate finance planning and financing frameworks, UNDP supports the strengthening of NDC financial planning to align with green recovery efforts, with the aim of supporting public spending decisions and mobilizing private finance to advance both agendas. Strengthening engagement with finance ministries includes aligning NDCs with green recovery because it requires a significant amount of coordination between government ministries, and so building on the support under climate promise, we are looking into a whole of government approach, and UNDP strengthening engagement between environment ministry that typically leads NDCs, and also development and finance ministries leading green recovery planning. And enhancing gender response and inclusive processes, because UNDP is leading the socioeconomic response to COVID-19 at country levels. So UNDP assesses the impacts of crisis on societies, economies, and vulnerable groups to inform governments' response efforts, and we also support participatory approaches to recovery planning. And the last one I wanted to mention is building national capacity and facilitating South-South collaboration. Again, we have a long history of strong networks of South-South cooperation and the sharing of experiences across countries and regions. So UNDP is leveraging its portfolio to facilitate learning and knowledge among practitioners, so that policymakers are equipped to make rapid and informed decisions that respond to COVID-19, while putting in place the foundation to both revitalize the economy and help achieve ambitious and inclusive climate action. Next slide is this is a slide also you have seen before. So the South Korean government's New Deal plans to invest about $144 billion US dollars in creating 1.9 million jobs by 2025. So this plan focuses on green digital New Deal, Green New Deal, and also this overarching policy support to strengthen employment and social safety nets. So we know about this. Also, we have talked today about the key projects that are ranging from green. These range from green mobility to smart healthcare, and it also includes central and local governments' involvement to bring innovation and jobs to the regional economy. So the important part of the New Deal is also the half of the money invested will be invested outside Seoul. And as we understand, in March, the government will launch the 5-year K New Deal Fund, seeking to invest about $3.5 trillion in 2021, with 35% financed by public sector and 65% raised privately. So this three-pronged model of Green New Deal is being led by private sector and backed by government, and this approach has generated high interest. As we know, Korea has very exceptional IT infrastructure and its digital competitiveness. And also has the very sophisticated consumer base, which pushes technology innovation and partnership. For example, from UNDP, we have a partnership with Samsung on global goals, with Samsung phone apps. And so international companies are also exploring the New Deal's projects into market entry and expansion. And as we see from our policy center, developing countries, I want to also learn from the policy lessons on Korea's recovery. So from our policy center, as I mentioned, we have been organizing expert meetings, webinars, and on the right, you see a blog post that I recently wrote to share and to kind of exchange information, to share information on Korea's efforts that other countries can look at. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and from Korea, I also work as part of UNDP on the multi-UN agency PAGE initiative, which is the Partnership for Action on Green Economy. It includes 5 UN agencies: UNDP, UNEP, ILO, UNITAR, and it has 20 country partners and 8 funding partners. So one of the 8 funding partners is the Republic of Korea. So I wanted to highlight some in my last slide on the PAGE work. That's also kind of as part of the Green ODA. So the PAGE was kind of established as a response to the Rio +20 conference call to support countries wishing to embark on greener and more inclusive growth trajectories. So in the context of COVID-19, with additional support from Germany, PAGE is supporting countries for initially 5 countries, and then 9 more applications were received in terms of green recovery funds. So PAGE is engaging with 5 UN agencies and the UN resident coordinators in the PAGE countries to develop country-specific proposals for additional support, and that specific targeted actions that will fuel green and inclusive recoveries from the impacts of COVID-19. And also, there's different advocacy activities are also ongoing. So I wanted to highlight the Green Renaissance. It's a podcast series on green recovery into different aspects, including sustainable finance and green recovery issues, with experts from within the UN system, but also global experts from various countries who are kind of being part of this podcast. So this is kind of the end of my presentation. I did want to end with a positive note. I think this year is a year of transition, and in that sense, an exciting year for us with the climate COP 26 coming up, and the biodiversity COP in COP 15 also coming up. So this year, it would be interesting to see how countries, move forward hopefully in the recovery planning and implementation phase of the pandemic, and also moving towards the 2030 agenda. From our center, we will of course continue to highlight and share the aspects of Korean experience and developing country experiences, and while we synergize our efforts with the UNDP overall. So I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. Next, the last but not least presentation of this session, I'd like to introduce Dr. Bernard Salinger, resident representative of Hans Zeidel Foundation of Korea.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. And I was a little worried I would speak in the lunchtime, but it's already far over now. Hope you're all back from your lunches. And I hope I can add something more to all these good presentations which have been done here. And let's see. I will talk today about something a little different because I will focus only on one country, namely North Korea, and the work towards sustainable development we do there since 15 years roughly now. Actually, my title of the presentation is not really exact because it is not ODA we do in North Korea, though our funding comes mainly from the German government's development funds. There are no official development relations between North Korea and European countries. This has political reasons. It has also reasons of being prepared to absorb these funds. So what we do is really one step lower. Namely, we do capacity building mainly, but you will see later that the boundaries are a little bit blurred on that. And before doing so, I will just very shortly introduce the Hans Seidel Foundation, which is a German political foundation. All of our fund is public funds, and in the case of our development work, it's funds from the German Ministry of Development and Economic Cooperation. And here you see the countries we are working in. Korea is a very special case because fortunately I'm living in the developed part of Korea, and we work with both South and North Korea, mainly on reconciliation projects. And since we do work in North Korea, I think it's warranted that I first try to give a little bit the political framework for this work and why we do it and why we choose then the sector of green projects to work with North Korea. Let us first consider this. In the past, North Korea itself was not really shy of international cooperation on its own terms. This is a propaganda picture showing all the people of the world coming to the leader of North Korea. And actually, indeed, North Korea was receiving students from African countries, for example, and it was having development projects in a number of countries. Though they had often a military component, there were also real development projects, building of hospitals, etc. But all this changed in something which I like to call the Great Disintegration, namely in the time after 1989. And we saw then various waves where North Korea either self-isolated or was isolated by sanctions, by not allowing them into international certain contexts, so that we have today a country which is largely disintegrated with the rest of the world, maybe more than most of all the other countries. And in this situation, we wanted to make a difference by reintegrating it, at least in certain contexts of green policy regimes. And the basic reasoning behind this that we think that this would help to change things in North Korea, open it up if you want so, and also to address various groups in North Korea if we don't take it as one monolithic state, but supporting groups which are more receptive to international cooperation. And we do this, and that's maybe the last political comment here I want to do, in treating North Korea not as a target to destabilize, but really as a partner in these projects. It's very, very important for us. And we choose green projects for the obvious reason that this is one of the fields where a difference can be made, a difference which is very, very important for the future, not only of North Korea, but also of the Korean Peninsula and the wider world, and which is also a field where the issue of political sanctions does not play such a role. In this relation, we started in 2010 to work on renewables and especially the clean development mechanism. In that time, the background was that North Korea had a project since 2003 with us, and they asked us, how can we join the CDM projects? And we helped them then to register all in all 8 projects successfully. Most of them, as you can see here also in the pictures, were hydropower projects, 6 of them. One was a wastewater project, one was project of methane gas from coal mines. And what we did in this context was to provide training, for example, on various forms of green energy, on the project management for CDM project, on financial aspects of CDM projects, etc. So we were not an investing agency here, or we were not providing funds for building these projects, but we did capacity building. And those of you who are involved in this field know that registering CDM projects is quite a difficult task for all developing countries, but here we had the additional difficulty really that we have had to print out every single change UNFCCC did in its monthly sessions on these CDM projects, which were very much in flux in that time because it was just starting to grow the project, and our partners in North Korea didn't have access to the internet, so it was very, very difficult really to work on the rules with them, but they achieved it, and they were very hard working on it. And so in the end we had these 8 projects registered. Unfortunately, I should say, the target market was clearly the European emissions market, and there was a time when we started when 1 ton of CO2 was valued at something like 20 euro that time. But when they finished the project, the market didn't work anymore. The prices for emissions had collapsed, and it was not economically feasible anymore. And then when prices rose again in the current situation now, sanctions from 2016 basically cut them off this market. So while the project were successful and were carried through, the economic benefits of them were not really realized by the North Koreans. As part of that, we had also a project on renewable energy. It has been mentioned in some of the previous speeches that, for example, cooking at the open fire is one of these sources of air pollution, and also often of accidents, and biogas projects were one part where we cooperated with the North Koreans, also solar projects. Those of you who have been there know that now mini-scale solar panels are very, very widespread, and the same is true for mini biogas providers, so where we can help also women in the countryside to gain a much better life. And also an interesting development, which you later see also in our second focus area, afforestation, was that this project was also coupled with a more open approach from the North Korean side on information providing. In that project, they set up carbon trade internet page where you can see the CDM information. The CDM information is anyway available through the UNFCCC, and it's very detailed information. It was the first time that North Korea ever showed all this information, like the grid connection, like exactly what turbines they used, what generators they used, etc. And it took a long political process for them to be able to do so, but they were successful, and they also set up this internet page, and that was part of this better international integration they achieved in this field. A second area of action for us was sustainable forestry. North Korea, like South Korea, once a densely forested country with up to 80% forest cover. Today, much of this forest cover has disappeared. We think that maybe up to 40% either disappeared or are severely degraded. And in this time, we started to work on capacity building on sustainable forestry, and for 3 years also with the help of the funding from the European Union and with a partner, the Ministry of Land and Environment Planning in DPRK in North Korea. We started to do a project on improvement of rural living conditions through healthy forests. As I said, the consulting and training had been ongoing before, also including internships, seminars, expert visits, etc. But in that time, we started then systematically also to work on a model afforestation. and on capacity building. And this capacity building, among others, included capacity building on a new forest inventory, national forest inventory, which is very, very important, because this, though it is not yet achieved completely, would also give a baseline for new forms of green finance for DPRK. Also, we published together books on various aspects of biodiversity, organic farming, greenhouses for tree nurseries, seedlings for plants, and we have an ongoing book publication series, which is only the last year interrupted through the corona pandemic, but we will take it up afterwards again. And just to show you what we did in very practical terms, we were starting to work on this hill in Sangsuri, which is around 40 kilometers west of Pyongyang. And it's a typical western lowland area of North Korea where almost all the forest cover disappeared because it was simply easy to climb up these hills and cut down the trees compared to the much steeper mountains you find in the eastern part of the peninsula. And on this hill, practically nothing grew anymore. That are pictures I took in 2012. And that's how it looks today. Oh, that's how it looked a few years later, not today. Today it's even more grown, and we achieved to build there quite healthy, nice mixed forest with a number of typical Korean species, and also some place to try out things like agroforestry, new species which might help in withstanding the pressure of climate change, etc. And you see the same here on various satellite pictures, all from the same autumn time, where you see how really the forest became denser and denser over a period of 10 years only. And it was achieved really with minimal financial input from our side. I think it was not more than $50,000, which we spent on those imports, which North Korea at that time couldn't really do. Like we had one pump and generator and a few pipes, which they don't produce domestically. It was all very, very moderate in cost. And it shows also that given there's a will and political will and the effort from as well the North Korean side and the side of donors, it would be easy to multiply such projects in the whole countries. One very important aspect for us was again to make this sustainable by also reaching from this model project to the wider forest community. And for that we worked with a central tree nursery in Pyongyang. And we established there a technical center, and in this technical center was set up a website in the North Korean intranet. So this website is unfortunately not available to us here. It's called Wangumsan, which means Golden Mountain, or that is a kind of buzzword in North Korea, excuse me, for afforestation. And to date, this afforestation website has more than 20,000 documents uploaded. It had, the last time we saw it, which is 2 years ago, due to the fact that last year we could not visit the country, already more than 2 million clicks. So it is quite lively used, given that it's a very, very specialized website in the country where access also to the intranet is not really widespread as it is here. And it has a question and answer section where, for example, foresters from remote places can ask questions and get counseling by their own experts from the tree nursery. So we think that helped really very, very much to spread the news about the possibilities of green ODA in the country. The final project I want to present here, this is our work on biodiversities on wetlands. Here we work with a number of partners, like, for example, IUCN, WWF. Should also say we have worked with other partners in Korea and beyond that before. And one of our partners is the Asia-Europe Foundation, which was mentioned before by Ms. Pulavska, and I'm very happy for this partnership. And another partner is a Green Growth Institute, and the Green Growth Institute sent one of their experts with us to DPRK in 2019, and we had a very good seminar on forest landscape restoration together, which was very helpful and which shows also that cooperation between different partners is important. And in this part on biodiversities and wetland, we cooperate among others with IUCN, WWF, Hong Kong Birdwatching Society, and other partners. And the two main partners were actually the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands and a smaller regional mixed governmental and intergovernmental and non-governmental organization, the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership. And those of you followed the political times a little bit in 2016-17, political tensions were very, very high. And it was not easy first to get members agree that DPRK becomes a member of these, even when they fulfilled some formal membership criteria. But in 2018, then finally they were members of the Ramsar Foundation, and 1 year later also of EAFP, and they are actively working in these organizations today. And we find that very, very important beyond the question of ODA, green ODA as in the green field itself, that it also provides a way for meeting and for reducing tensions on a topical level, here the environment. This included capacity building as a preparation, training abroad, like in Mongolia, and in the DPRK to support the environmental sector, to lead to an improvement of skills and knowledge. It meant also that DPRK had to select sites. Basically, they selected 2 sites as Ramsar sites, Moondog on the west coast and Rason on the east coast, and 2 sites as so-called flyway network sites, Kumya and Moondog for the EAFP. And the core challenge was for us really to help them create a new national wetland inventory. They had an old 20-year-old wetland inventory, which had been very valuable that time, but which was outdated. And we helped them with partners to publish a new wetland inventory through surveying east and west coast sites and helping them surveying on themselves more sites, for example, also in the sensitive inter-Korean border area. We did awareness raising activities, for example, celebrating International Days of Wetlands, International Days of Migratory Birds, or in Moondog we had this Swan Goose Festival going on, and we helped them to enhance their own networks in international meetings and conferences, and helped them to participate in places like UNFCCC or other places to grow this network. Currently we are working among others in the Tumen River Delta area, where we hope maybe in the future to establish a trilateral and cross-border international wetland area, including parts in China, Russia, and DPRK. But this work, as all other work with DPRK, is currently, due to the pandemic, on hold. Last but not least, I want to give this, for us, very important and good news that though, as you know, the pandemic was very, very difficult. It stopped also all financial support we gave our partners in DPRK to do the work. But still, our partners are very actively continuing their work. And here you see a number of selected publications in Korean and in English, which they published last year, dealing with biodiversity in this field mainly. In the middle, you see here our main partner, Mrs. Ree, who is the Director General in the Ministry of Land and Environment Planning, and really a fantastic partner to do these projects. And that shows that while certainly incentives from the outside and from international donors are important, it's not the only reason these projects are carried out. Once we had get them started, they worked on themselves. They did their own surveys, like summer bird surveys here in Moondog. And that is for us a very, very encouraging news, because clearly if you do work in DPRK more than in many other countries, you are contested and you are questions. What are you doing there actually? What does happen to your money? What is their benefit and what is also their incentive to do this kind of work. And we are very happy to see that the work is genuinely going on, also in times when these outside incentives are less or not coming anymore. I would like to say that, as all of you know, sanctions is a very, very difficult issue for us, because it, especially in the fields where more important technical advice is necessary, like in the National Forest Inventory, or where also certain material incentives would be very helpful. That's less in biodiversity, more so, for example, in afforestation. We are now very, very much bound. We helped DPRK to establish a working contact with Green Climate Fund, and we are very happy. That's also our partner became this national authority dealing with GCF. We see a great future for DPRK in doing climate projects. We hope they can be done peninsula-wise on the whole peninsula, but that's up to DPRK and ROK to decide in the end. But we are sure that it would be a missed opportunity if, for political reasons, these projects could not take place in DPRK. So I hope really also that, though the focus today is really worldwide ODA, green ODA of ROK and other entities, that this also is an opportunity to draw the attention on this a little bit neglected field, where also with rather limited financial means for the Korean Peninsula and for the world, a lot can be done, for example, in the field of afforestation. The more so since really on the doorstep in the southern part, they have the example for successful afforestation, and a lot could be done. And the last point on that one, maybe I didn't include it here in my presentation because I was also not sure about the time limits, but it is not only a long-term aspect or an aspect of world climate, but for DPRK people, afforestation is also a question of life and death, because every year people are dying due to landslides, due to flooding, and we ourselves were one time 2015 in Rationale and saw how a relatively local event like strong rain after a typhoon can lead to a disaster where whole villages disappear. So it's really also from that point of view time to act on that. And with this note, I want to end here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zellinger, and the same to all presenters for your astute discussion on the different roles of international organizations in Green ODA. With this, we now close session 3 and let us move on to session 4.